Welcome to JustWannaQuilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. This is Elizabeth Townsend-Gard, your host, and I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School and a faculty fellow at the A.B. Friedman School of Business at Tulane. And I just want to quilt. Today we talked to Andrea Wraastald. She talks to us about A&E Fabric, her adventure there, about her new sewing room, and her transition from scuba to quilting.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Wraastald, and I'm calling from Pensacola, Florida.
Awesome. And tell me your first memory of someone sewing or quilting in your life.
I would say that would have to be my paternal grandmother. She owned one of those dinosaur black heavy Singer 66-16 models back in the 50s, and she pretty much used that her entire, senior years, and I inherited that. She would make mostly apparel, but she was an accomplished sewist, and by that I mean, for example, I had the privilege of seeing some of the beautiful garments like outer coats, winter coats that she would make. And one of the most profound things I think she made was for my aunt's wedding when she got remarried in her 70s, and my grandmother made her a matching brocade dress and matching coat, and it was just absolutely stunning.
That's really cool. And so when did you start quilting? When did you get interested in quilting?
Well, it's kind of funny. So my first mother-in-law, she was an accomplished sewist. She made clothes for Disney World, for a company she worked at up in Mountain City, Tennessee. And after that, she would come home and, make quilts in the evenings and stuff like that. And that was probably when I was in my early 20s. And, when you're a new wife and you have other things that you want to do in life, I always viewed quilting as something that's for what I now say for the old folks.
Yeah.
And, it was not something that back in the day in the 80s was something cool for people who were 20-somethings to be engaged in. Mm-hmm. So my kind of passion for many, many years, probably 30 years, was scuba diving. And so I was a passionate diver, having dived pretty much all over the world except for Australia and the Middle East over the years. And so in my profession, after I retired from active duty in the Navy and became an HR professional, when I came back from working overseas in 2011, I decided it was time to, as we kind of say, dust off and pull out the old sewing machines and see if they worked, because they had been in storage pretty much from 88 till 2011.
Now, why? Now, let me just pause and ask you why. Like, why did suddenly in 2011 do you say, hey, I think I want to see if the sewing machines work? Like, what motivates you?
Well, it was interesting because when I came back from overseas, I got this job here in Pensacola working for the Department of the Navy, and I had hoped to be able to move back to Jacksonville because I have a home over there. And so my husband and I decided that it was best if we rented a condo for a couple years over on Perdido Key. And so it was like, oh, gee, it's great. I'll be able to dive and whatnot, but maybe I need to see if those sewing machines work and get them serviced and see what I can do with them. And so I took the old big black Singer up to one of the local shops here in Pensacola to have it serviced. And back in the day, you know, those old sewing machines had those big, heavy, wrapped cord type, what do I want to equate it to? Like a sewing machine or like a clothesline type cord.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh gosh, I'm not sure this is even safe to use in this day and age with, you know, the electrical current. And so one thing led to another. I got that up and running, and then I had the Fashion Mate 237, and that was something that I had had since 8th grade. And I lifted that thing and said, oh my gosh, these things are like lifting a cannonball. They're terribly heavy. So when I was living in the condo, I'd have my girlfriend from Jacksonville, who's now down living in Ocala, come over a couple times a year, and we would get together to sew. And every time she came, she would bring over something she made for me and had embroidered. And some of those things were mug rugs or dish towels that were embroidered. Well, there was this one particular thing that I had always admired over at her home in Jacksonville. And it was this Prairie Point pineapple quilted wall hanging. And I said, you know, I would really, really like you to make me one of these. And I said, you know, you always make me such nice things. I'd like to have one of these. And she said, I'm not going to make you one. If you want one, I'll help you, you know, with the pattern, get it cut out, but I'm not going to make you one. You need to learn how to do this stuff yourself. And needless to say, here several years later, I do have it cut out, but I haven't begun to construct it. But, you know, I since then have made probably half a dozen baby quilts and a number of mug rugs, and I made a quilt based on the pattern in AQS's May 2016 pattern called Love in Bloom, using the P&B Textiles fabric line. And I had the privilege of meeting the designer of that fabric line at the quilt show in Houston this past November, which was really fun because we had a fantastic discussion. And she had no idea that her fabric had been chosen and used and, you know, made into a quilt that's published in this magazine.
It's very cool.
It's so neat to find, and, you know, yes, you know, you get to meet Ricky Timms and Alex Anderson, but to get to meet a designer of a fabric collection was absolutely fascinating.
That's really cool.
And so there were evenings at the show in Houston. You know, I stopped by her booth and just kind of chatted, and we've agreed to keep in touch, and so that's kind of really neat.
That's super neat.
My mother, on the other hand, was never a sewist. She was a knitter and did a little bit of crocheting. So that's kind of a little bit how I got into it. And I do belong to the Guild here in Pensacola, as well as the Guild in Gulf Shores. I belong to Gulf States Quilting Association,
That's
and I'm
cool.
sure you know Judy Walker.
Yes,
as
she's my
well
neighbor.
for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. That's awesome.
It's been a really great experience. And, you know, as we get older, you know, one of the things I've often thought about is, you know, I'm not going to be scuba diving when I'm in my 70s and 80s if I have the privilege to live that long. And so that was another reason that I decided, you know, it was time to take up quilting. And it's really great for your memory because, as you know, you do a lot of math when you want to calculate and you come up with your own patterns and designs.
Well, and also, you know, the thing that I think is so interesting about quilting is that it's so physical. Like you're you're moving a lot, you're like, you're ripping out a lot, at least on my side, but you're cutting fabric and you're ironing it and you're moving around, and it's not solitary. People always think of quilting as a solitary activity, but I know with at least me, the two kittens and we get a big workout from all the things we're doing when we're really quilting. There's just a lot of component parts. So I think that part too, you're just doing a lot. There's a lot of moving, So I think it's a workout, especially going to the shows, The shows are a workout too, so quilt shows.
They are. Boy, you certainly get your steps in when you go to these big shows like over in Houston or up in Paducah.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable, isn't it? Yeah,
it
really
is.
do.
It is.
Okay.
And so the other thing I wanted to just kind of not necessarily brag about, but when I got this quilting thing, my husband was like a couple of years ago, he just tossed, one day we're sitting at the table and he tossed this idea. What do you think about me building onto the back of the house?
That is so cool. Right, so you sent a thing about that your husband built a room for quilting. That is incredible.
Back of the house.
Amazing. So when you build something are you involved? Because one of the things is always where do you put the ironing board and all that stuff, right? Did you help with the plans to sort of figure out how this would be constructed? Yeah?
I did. So basically, we knew where it needed to go within the confines of the property. And we knew that we needed it, or we'd like it to, be extended to be 16 by 30. So it's about 480 square feet. I knew where I wanted the windows, what type of windows I wanted.
That's so
I wanted
cool.
crown molding. I basically wanted it, as silly as it sounds, the crown molding to be like the rest of the house. I just didn't want a room put together, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And
so that if it could be used for other things, if for some reason someone didn't want it for quilting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we have two entrances, an external entrance from the side of the house with steps, and then we have a regular entrance from within the house. I've made Roman shades. It's painted in a lovely, soothing, seafoam green, and as you can tell from our earlier discussion from scuba diving, I love diving and seashells, so what a surprise that I would have seashell
kind of
fabric for the curtains, for the Roman shades.
So
and
how do
I
you
put a TV in there and some old pieces of furniture that my grandmother had given me, and we had custom cabinets put in, and I'm kind of a bit of this OCD person, so all the fabric is, categorized, folded accordingly through that little video you've probably seen on Quilting Digest. So that kind of goes back to my, being a paralegal where, you're very regimented, you don't want to miss the detail, and so
how are you liking?
It's really an accomplishment to see this
really
room, and I'm very proud of it.
That's very cool. And so how do you like sewing in it?
I love it, but Dr. Townsend-Gard, the problem is that four-letter word work, or that four-letter word life that gets in the way.
Yeah. And
so, once in a while I'll be out there in the evening after work or on the weekends, now's a great time of year to be able to do that when you don't have to, spend so much time taking care of yards and other stuff.
All that extra stuff. People it's weird. Laundry, pets want to be fed, all those things that get in the way. It's ridiculous. Right?
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, this is super cool.
So, I think the other thing I wanted to talk about that we briefly talked offline about was this fantastic store I hope you've heard about over here.
So we haven't interviewed at A&E Fabrics in Pensacola, but we've had people go and we've had people talk about it. So you'll have to put us in touch with them because I would love to interview them. So tell me why. Yes, because I heard because you said you had a conversation with them on Friday. So tell me more about why do people go crazy for A&E? Because it's everybody that goes there is like way into it, and I'm wondering why. Like, what makes it different than other quilting shops?
Right. I think there are several things. That being, it's recognized as one of the largest in the top 5 quilt shops in the South. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a one-stop shop place, if you will. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily need to run out in town to, one of the large retail shops to get your stuff. You can do one-stop shopping under one roof in this building. They have everything.
They don't, like a lot of quilt shops sort of specialize in certain things, but if you're a modern quilter or you like batiks or reproduction, you can do anything there. Like, that's kind of their ideas.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes, I'll kind of give you a rundown. They have over 10,000 bolts of fabric to choose from, and that pretty much expanded when the A&E pharmacy side closed down and they sold their inventory in the pharmacy to Walgreens in July of 2017. So what ended up happening was they expanded their fabric over into the former pharmacy side. So really, it's almost like double in size over there now. And they carry about 25 brands. They also have collegiate and NFL licensed fabric, Minky fabric. They have quilt rulers, sewing notions, an incredible supply of sewing notions. Batting, whether you want to buy it in packages or off a long roll, like say you were going to make a king-size quilt, you could have that piece cut to measure pretty much. They have quilting classes. They sell patterns for apparel quilts. They sell books on crafts and home decor, buttons and trim. They also have more than just quilter's cotton. They sell apparel fabric, so formal attire fabric. Yeah. If you wanted to make a ball gown or costume fabric, you know, because Mardi Gras is obviously very popular over in this area.
Yeah, that sounds great.
They also sell those AccuQuilt fabric cutters and dies, that Eversewn brand of sewing machine. And one thing that's really interesting is while they don't have an online store, they do offer the ability to call in an order with like a credit card and have it shipped out.
Oh, interesting.
And when I was talking to the owner recently, I said, what about an online store? Do you see that in your future?
And what did they say?
And she said, that's funny you mentioned that because I am considering and evaluating the possibility of opening an online store.
Interesting.
The other really cool thing is that they have a fabric club you can join annually. I want to say it's $20. It entitles you to club discounts off various types of fabric throughout the year. So, it could be Halloween fabric, Christmas fabric, fabric particular color, and that sort of thing. And you may have heard recently A&E hosted Jacqueline Dijon, and she's a renowned artist, quilt designer, and quilter from the Netherlands, and she taught a 3-day class recently at A&E. And A&E also has a Facebook page, a blog, and I asked the owner if she was going to be listed in the county register, and she is working on that. That's that free print newspaper that you find at many of the quilt shops across the U.S., and it lists information on quilt shops, quilt show events, and that sort of thing. So
well, that sounds really great.
It's really the, greatest shop, I would say, in my personal experience, down at least along the Gulf Coast. I would say it's probably the largest in the Gulf Coast area.
That's very cool. Well, that you sound like you don't work for them, but you sound like a great advocate for them.
And I, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, as they look at it, I'm usually up there once or twice a month. I like to see what's new, what's come in, check on, if I have a friend send me something and, hey, have you seen this? Mm-hmm. If I haven't seen it, I'll send it to them and say, hey, do you remember this line? Do you know if you're going to be carrying it?
Yeah.
And then they'll get back to me right away.
Well, that sounds great. Now, before we run out of time, I know you had 2 copyright questions. So I have them here. One is about manuals, Bernina manuals that you took to the Office Depot. Is that right? And because they had copyright, the question was, so that Kinko's wasn't happy about you making copies of the manuals. First of all, my question was, why were you making copies of the manuals in the first place?
So I like to keep copies at I have like a repository, if you will, of these manuals. I'm kind of still like old school, so I like to have them printed, and then if I want to highlight them or have them.
So it was like personal use. You wanted to use them at home. You weren't selling them. You weren't giving it.
Use.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that, so the reason Kinko's got freaked out, is it Kinko's? Office Depot got freaked out, is that Kinko's got sued for copyright infringement. And so they're the people that are working in copy shops now, like Office Depot and Staples and FedEx, Kinko's, have been trained to not make copies of things that have copyright on them, because that could potentially cause them to be contributory liable. So 2 things. First of all, you can explain to them, it's for personal use. I'm just making a copy for my personal use, and that's usually okay. Now, if they don't like that, you can just make the copy yourself. So the beauty is that there's no liability on their part if you're making the copy. It's just the fact when they make a copy, because they're earning money off of making a copy on somebody else's copyrighted work. Does that make sense? Even if it's indirect. And that's what was freaking them out. So when they said this was the last time they'd be printing stuff like this, it was that if you came in and asked them to print 5 more copies of that, they'd be concerned, right?
Right.
So,
and they may not have a way to track it.
Exactly. So they don't know who you are, and they don't know if you're being naughty or not. And so that's the problem, is that there's no so you can use fair use, or you can just print it yourself there, and that makes it less, that puts them in a better position. Does that make sense? That's why they're worried. So, I mean, you also can bring your other ones back in and be like, hey, look, I need to make a copy of this other manual, but look what I did with the last 2 copies. I just marked it up and I'm keeping it. So don't worry, I'm not selling it and I'm not doing anything bad with it. I'm just kind of obsessive about manuals and I want to mark up one that's a copy. So I think as long as they feel comfortable that they're not contributing to you doing something naughty, they should be okay. Now that said, their people are often trained to just be like, no. So understand that that's just the company protecting itself from someone, because you know what? You could be a spy, right? You could be somebody from Bernina that is checking to see if they're allowing copies to be made of their manuals or something. They don't know. They don't know who you are. And so there is a worry that somehow they're going to get caught and sued. And that's why those companies are that way.
Right.
That make sense?
So I like the idea where you suggest it would be permissible to do it on your own, put your thumb drive into the printer at the shop where you can print your own stuff.
Right. And they can bind it for you. That's not any problem. So just stick it in, run the copy, and be like, hey, can you put a spiral binding on this for me?
Great.
Yeah, easy. And you get control over how it looks, too. So that's good. Okay,
Right.
that was easy. That was a
And I had that other question I wanted you to
now, this
address.
one, I don't have the answer necessarily, but your other question is about embroidery designs. And interestingly enough, at Houston, we bought an embroidery machine. So we are just starting our embroidery project. We haven't even actually turned the machine on because that's like next week's plan.
Right.
But what you're asking about is, so embroidery machines have embroidery designs, and some come with the machines. Sometimes you can purchase it. Some are free online. And the question is how far you can go with any one design. And that's really a complicated question, but it has different parts. One is this something that is in the public domain? Is it a square or circle or something so common like a fleur-de-lis that it's not protectable? And then you can do whatever you want with it. That's the first. That's the first level. You know, like those boxes, or like it looks like a medal or something like that. Like something that is so basic that the Copyright Office would never let that be registered, and they don't register common shapes, and they're pretty sticky about that one. We don't want to lock up the square. So that part's easy. The next question is then each copyright holder can decide what you can do with that work. So that when you purchase the machine, it probably has a license agreement. When you go to Etsy or someplace else, it's going to tell you what you can and can't do with it. And if they're smart about it, they're also going to tell you how much you can alter it. So if you alter a pattern, it's called a derivative work. And so that should also be something that they say that you can or can't do. Now, I think there's a lot of questions in this. First, I don't really know what the embroidery people are doing, the designers are doing. I'm actually interviewing somebody about that tomorrow. I also don't know, so I don't know if they're putting a Creative Commons license on or some sort of licensing scheme that allows you to create derivative works. Also enforcement, I don't know if they're registering their works. If there's no enforcement, I always think that's kind of silly. And then, of course, the question that you asked, which is, can you alter it and then sell it? And again, I think this is part law, part custom, and I don't know anything about embroidery yet. So your question is a really good question. I don't have any answers yet. This is our next big project for the year, is understanding embroidery designs and and also, all the other kind of things that you can get, templates and other things that, when is it protectable, when is it not? And we just started that project, so it was a perfect question to ask.
Oh, great. I'm very, very interested in that, particularly, when I hear people discussing, I'm going to do this or that, and I, have cautioned you need to be really careful about that and make sure what you're doing is permissible, under the law.
It's true. Now, on the other side of it, just to play devil's advocate, there's not a lot of enforcement. So on the one side, are you selling it at your kid's school? Well, nobody's going to really care, right? Are you selling 50 million of them on a platform that's super public? Yeah, they're going to care a lot. So it's that spectrum of it really, I think it really comes down to when does it matter? If someone feels like they're losing economic, you're taking it and
right.
You're selling, you know what I mean? They're getting harmed by it, then that makes sense. And then you have to look at the harm to see if it actually is something that the law covers or not. The law doesn't cover everything. So the question really becomes, and I don't know. So, I mean, I'm on both sides of it. We're in the neutral zone. We're New Orleans. So I'm not really saying I'm not pro, just swipe everybody's stuff. But I'm also kind of cautious to be well, what exactly are you trying to do with it? And how aggressive have the people that created the design been to protect their work? Again, have they registered the work? Have they made the license explicit of what you can and can't do? Have they made it easy for you to know what they are allowing and not allowing? And then also, is it protectable or not? Are they doing something that's original, or is it not protected by copyright anyway, even if they claim it is? So I think it's a really complicated issue. And I think that there needs to be more materials out there for people to help them, Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because I think it is kind of that uncharted territory. And, as quilting and embroidery and more
of this type of craft work becomes front and center, and technology develops, I really think that that is a topic that deserves a good bit of attention and education.
Well, you're right. For me, you're spot on, because this really is our next big project. We've been looking at patterns and pattern makers this year as a really pretty significant thing, and we're just about done with that project. So the next thing is this embroidery space. Oh, kitten.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you addressing those two topics.
Well, cool. Well, I am just thrilled to chat with you. I'm so glad that you're thinking about these things, and let's keep chatting. And as we go, as you see me you're part of the Quilting Army, right?
Yes.
Okay. So on our Facebook page, as I start, because when I'm writing, because I just start to ask a whole bunch of questions when I'm writing stuff. So as I start to post those questions, come back and let's chat more as I learn. I'll have some answers eventually. I'm really cautious about, these are really hard questions. They're not just easy answers. It's not like yes or no. And that's kind of why we're doing the project,
Exactly. And please, if you're ever over this way, I'd love to have the opportunity to meet you.
Oh, that'd be great. Well, we're trying to figure out what we're doing this summer, so it would be a lot of fun. It would be great. So
great.
Awesome. Well, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. I totally appreciate it. And I'll let you know, are you cool with it being posted as is?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Fabulous. All right, cool. Well, I'll let you know when we're posting it. We are gathering all of the interviews now for season 3 that will begin in February. So it may be just a short time, but everything should be up soon.
Thank you. Great.
Awesome.
Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and wishing you and your family a wonderful holiday season.
Oh, you too. You too. Take care.
Thank you so much again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So you've been listening to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. And I'm Elizabeth Townsend Gard. If you like this podcast, keep listening. Also, we have a Facebook group. Come join us. We talk about a lot of things. We also have an Instagram account. And of course, most importantly, I really hope you get a chance to quilt today.